Hi, this is Marie with Marie Ridgevine Associates, and I am going to be reviewing the comprehensive wellness program components that your agency can consider. So this training is a piece of a larger peer support training, but this video in particular is meant to explain how peer support can be a really important piece of a whole puzzle that makes up a comprehensive wellness program for a first responder agency. I speak specifically to law enforcement here, but of course this applies to all first responders because of the high stress nature of the work, the physical, mental, emotional toll that it takes. So I'll speak about peer support programming with clinical consultation in the way that that can be, of course, beneficial in group type interventions and peer-to-peer support interventions. I'll talk about what makes up a strong candidate for a police therapist. I'll talk about a mentor program that agencies are using, chaplaincy services, employer paid therapy sessions, why those are helpful and becoming so popular, annual all staff check-ins. I'll explain what those are and what they aren't. For new hires, wellness related protocols that you could at least approach new hires with, if not part of a much larger program. And then I'll talk about family programming, healthy family meetings and family community building activities, work out on do-it-do policies and practices, annual all staff training, really quality training on nutrition, exercise, mobility, financial management, mental health, stress management. All of those pieces are important parts of a comprehensive wellness approach. Therapy dog programming. In addition to mentioning it here, there's also a webinar that is happening February 1st of 2022, and then will be available to access on our virtual classroom on demand. Critical incident support, app-based services. We are partnered with Cortico, who was acquired by Lexipol recently. Policy considerations related to the 6 resilience factors generally, and then a wellness room, and a handout is included in your agency's participation in this course. A handout is included for you and your agency on how to create a wellness room, including links to all of the pieces that would make it up. And then training throughout these 30 hours of peer support training on how to utilize what's in a wellness room. The option of a sabbatical, which at least one Minnesota agency is using. OIS policies related to wellness, including the law enforcement family piece and how OISs can affect or do affect the family at home. Familiarity building services with a therapist and how important it is to really allow us as police therapists to build rapport, to become familiar resources, and to overcome that fear and the unknowns associated, since the first interactions with a therapist or a psychologist is often during a pre-employment evaluation. It sets a tone that isn't helpful when it comes to care services. So giving your law enforcement therapist the opportunity to help overcome that initial tone that gets set there is super important. Heart health and screenings related to heart health is important. We'll talk about preventable heart disease, how common it is, and what can be done. Substance abuse and dependency support and policies, 24/7, not 23/7, clinical consultation, and then retirement transition assistance is another important piece. So I'll mention just regarding that briefly, since there isn't a slide for it specifically. There are some agencies who, upon nearing retirement, are providing ongoing care with their law enforcement therapists to retirees following retirement, knowing that that transition can be difficult. And there are also peer support teams who are including retirees on their team so that they can make sure to help those who are making that transition. I apologize for any dog barking in the background. I'll try to pause my recording when that comes up, but I've got a couple of extra pups here with me this week, and so it's going to be hard to avoid. So the premise for this idea of a full spectrum or comprehensive wellness program, the idea is that the work of being a first responder, especially law enforcement, as we're speaking to here and focusing on, has a lot of withdrawals built in. So if you think of each of us as carrying around a bank account, essentially, our nervous system, our brain has to constantly manage resources. And a lot of the work that's done in law enforcement and other very stressful, strenuous, and potentially traumatic lines of work just requires a lot of withdrawals. So, you know, our nervous system, our brain is always balancing these resources, trying to predict how much is going to be needed for what. The chronic stress that's so common is a large withdrawal that goes along with the work. And so to offset that, there's a lot of deposits that need to be made. And first, it's important to know what makes up the withdrawals and the deposits. Some of those were listed on this slide, but that's not all encompassing. Really, the withdrawals have to do with toxic stress, the type of stress that is not the mild or moderate healthy kind. The positive stressors like exercise, like mental activity, and the things that push our limits in a healthy way are good for us. In fact, our bodies and our minds and our emotional health can deteriorate if we don't challenge it somewhat. But it can also go too far. And that's, of course, what we're talking about with these wellness program components, is how to offset that, how to make deposits, how to help someone be more resilient and able to bounce back from that stress, and how to help the stressors be mild and moderate versus toxic. So depending on how full someone's bank account is with those positive deposits is going to help determine how big of the withdrawals are taken. And when a large withdrawal is taken, how much is left in that account. So to think of it another way, of course, what we're trying to adjust here, one of the pieces is stress injury. So the actual injury to the brain that can come from that accumulation of stress. Law enforcement officers are all very mentally strong. I always say that. If you've ever been to a training or a presentation of mine or one of my associates, it's what we speak to, because it really is a foundational piece of the work we do. You all are very strong, and the accumulation of stressful events stacks up. So what we're trying to avoid is this number getting too high. So it's common to fluctuate in these numbers over time, over a career. But what's dangerous is, of course, once somebody meets criteria, going beyond mild, moderate, and moderate to severe. So the sooner someone can recognize that this number is rising, and a peer support team can, of course, assist in recognizing this in their peers, especially after the training that they are going through here, you are going through in this 30-hour training. The sooner you can recognize that and then know what to do to address it, the healthier a person can be over time and over a career. Really isn't ever just one single acutely stressful event in a career that causes someone to jump way up on this scale. Someone who finds themselves really high at a 6, a 7, an 8, certainly a 7 or an 8, they didn't get there one day. It's really like the fable of the boiling frog. If someone jumps into scalding water, you feel it and it's painful. And that certainly happens in the general population. But for law enforcement, it's more so that you don't notice the temperature rising. It starts out room temperature, body temperature, but then it rises, and it's harder to notice that it's starting to hurt and cause an injury. So when someone is susceptible, they already have that stack of stress. They may not be on top of their resilience factors, which has led to this stacking of stressors really sticking with their system. And then they are at risk of anything big or small, however much it takes to overwhelm their system. So in my practice, we really focus on 6 resilience factors. These are the pieces related to brain science, our bodies, our emotional, mental, physical, spiritual health, and the 6 areas that we need to attend to. So in this approach with these 6 resilience factors is the assumption that we are speaking to those of you who have an inherently stressful job and career. So we know that toxic stress is built in, and we also know that it can be addressed through wellness programming. So the 6 areas are ways that we try to encourage individuals and agencies to really offset the weight of the scales here on the disease side. So when I say disease, this would be all encompassing: heart disease, brain injury, stress injury, essentially, to the brain from post-traumatic stress disorder. All of these pieces that come into play from the toxic stress. We try to offset those by really piling on to the side of the scale that I've titled ease. The opposite of disease is ease. And so I'll talk throughout this training and partly today about how to build in ease. And part of that is to use healthy stress, such as exercise, and the healthy stressors that challenge us in good ways and build up our resilience, and also to use rest and to fuel our bodies and our brains with what we do, who we interact with, and how we go about our lives in a balanced way. What makes all of this successful is, of course, a combination of both opportunities to act on these resilience factors through agency programming, the encouragement of it, not just the policy, but the practice of these options, and then the individual initiative. Nobody can make anybody else do any of these things that it takes, but you can certainly set the stage for it, encourage it, and build a culture of wellness around these pieces. Sleep and deep rest are the top most important pieces for resilience. Exercise, nutrition, hydration are a close second, but no one of these is necessarily in any particular order other than that. They more so work really in concert with each other, really with the assumption that although all of these are really, really important for brain health and the sustainability of the career, they are really important in conjunction with each other. So if you sleep fantastically, but you never exercise and you eat horribly, you can't possibly have strong resilience. If you exercise fantastically, but you never sleep, you really can't have the best resilience. So nobody is going to be great at all of these all of the time, but this is where it makes the most sense to really pinpoint our efforts so that we can be as efficient and effective as is necessary. So I'll start out here reviewing some of these. I will spend a little more time on some than others, but I want to introduce you to all of the potential components that are out there right now. And I don't know of any agency yet that has every single one of these in place, but boy, if someone wants to get there, please let me know. I would love to take on that challenge with you and help you connect to what you would like to have in place. And then we can share with others how you're doing. I've got 2 agencies that you have or are about to hear from, and how they have set things up regarding peer support at Washington County, and then next will be regarding wellness programming overall at Blaine Police, and from an agency administrator side, kind of how that's looked and how they've developed. But if anybody wants to keep going with it, which many agencies are, I am so excited about that. So please do, and please let me know. Peer support programming with clinical consultation. So all of these components I'm going to review, they're not in any particular order, except since this is a peer support training overall, I've started here because it is also a great place to start. You can, as I mentioned, include retirees. Your peer support team is going to be trained in group support, such as diffusings and individual peer-to-peer support. There are so many ways a peer support team can address wellness, can do outreach, can make sure to connect with individuals, with peers throughout the year and after certain types of calls. There's so much that can be done. They really are the eyes and the ears and the on-site support. It's really such a neat thing because a peer support team can reach further into the wellness culture at your agency than a law enforcement therapist like me can. We are purposely not on site because it's easier for an officer to stay anonymous and to feel like they have the privacy and confidentiality that they need in order to seek services. But because we're not on site and we are not a peer, there's good reason for that, but there's also good reason to have that arm of your programming on site. So you're capitalizing on your existing employees who already have exceptional skills. We're just building on that, developing that. We're forming some structure around it, some additional information, understanding, self-reflection, information on self-care to avoid burnout, and really helping in building that culture of wellness at your agency. If about 10% of your staff are who make up your peer support team, that's a healthy number. And continual recruitment for the team is important because people retire, people move on, people need to take a step away from the team for different personal and professional reasons. And you always want to make sure you have enough there so that any one person gets burned out. So during a peer support training that I do, we include the opportunity for significant personal growth and also for development of each individual peer team member. So the foundation for becoming a peer leader is based on this personal growth, personal awareness and understanding of self. Emotional intelligence really is the basis of a peer support member. So we'll develop that from all different angles: ethics, boundaries, self-care, personal awareness, and we'll really help people take a look at themselves. Just like it's such parallel work to be a peer support member to being a therapist. You never want to find yourself being a hypocrite. You got to take your own advice, be aware of what you're going to be speaking to others about in order to help them, and make sure that you have things in your own mind and body and emotions lined up as well. This training provides the opportunity to capitalize on your existing courage. You all display and, of course, have and express a lot of courage through the work that you do, which is related to safety and survival. We apply those same skills and abilities and virtues on the towards peers. So the courage to take a look at yourself, to look in the mirror and self-reflect, the courage to be vulnerable with your peers, to help connect them, to try new things, to get the help they may need, to do something differently, to take a look at their own resistance towards growth, and to really do that in a parallel way. Patience, camaraderie, selflessness, and embracing of adversity. So most importantly, there is a peer support team member sees a challenge as an opportunity for growth. And so we will capitalize on that tendency, which I'm sure everyone who has signed up for this course has. And then that can be also one of those pieces that make up the tone that a team sets within an agency and helps encourage other peers to have as well. I'm going to talk about how to find a strong law enforcement therapist. There are a number of factors. You want to look more at this. There's a book called Counseling Cops by Dr. Ellen Kirschman. She does a good job of laying out a lot of the pieces. I have a training, 16 hours to 8-hour sections for therapists in how to effectively work with law enforcement. And this is something that I hope gets standardized really in the United States in the coming years. There is certainly a unique factor or multiple unique factors that law enforcement therapists need to have, and not all therapists are cut out to work with first responders. You may know this already if you've been to a therapist who wasn't occupationally competent, and you may be caught on pretty quickly that they didn't really fully understand you or how to help you. So we really want to avoid that. You don't often get a second chance with first responders, especially law enforcement. So it's important to already know really well what you're doing, what your limitations are, where your client is coming from. And you need to know enough about the culture of law enforcement and the clinical themes that you need to know how to address. Somebody who's a good fit for this role hasn't allowed the media to define their perception of police. And they've checked their own biases. They've not just checked them at the door, but have examined them and, really chosen the route of curiosity over judgment. A law enforcement therapist understands the closed culture from the inside, hopefully through personal relationship. If not, at least through close professional relationship and those familiarity building activities such as ride-alongs, roll calls. I can't think of anything that I've done that I've ever learned more from other than ride-alongs. Being in the squad, spending hours and hours and hours in all parts of the metro area, learning what it's like to be on that side of it, what gets presented, the way that the work happens, truly from that first person perspective, but of course still not in the uniform. So always having that little bit of removal from it, but understanding it from that regard or from being on the family side of it, any of those things are so important. Someone who's motivated to provide person-centered care to law enforcement and keeps care separate from evaluation. So keeping the person as the focus in therapy is important, and then keeping care separate from evaluation allows a therapist to not only focus on a person as inherently worthy and worthy of unconditional positive regard, but also helps keep the focus on care and not evaluation. There's such a difference, and as I mentioned earlier, it's really what we have to work against is that original or often original experience with a therapist or a psychologist that really was their evaluation, and can create more of a sense of fear or distrust or mistrust or more vulnerability than really needs to be there. In actuality, there's full confidentiality minus the mandated reporting pieces, which are minimal. A law enforcement therapist needs to understand the need to practice without diagnosing whenever possible. This is important. Not all therapists will do this. However, in this line of work, it's very easy to know that what is being dealt with are either stress injuries, some struggle with the effects of stress and its symptoms, secondary effects of those stress symptoms, which often show up in the family, at home, in the body physically, or with overuse of alcohol or any such things. So being able to practice without a diagnosis is important. It can help remove one of those barriers to access to care for law enforcement. The ability to build trust or rapport quickly. You likely won't get a second chance. So someone who is approachable, likable, can get along with anyone, is easy to talk with is important. Someone who has comfort with transparency and appropriate self-disclosure. As Dr. Kirschman mentions, it's certainly true that you sometimes need to self-disclose with law enforcement more than you would with the general population. In fact, a therapist would often never self-disclose in the general population, but often will when it's to the benefit of the client when working with law enforcement, if it helps to build trust and to humanize the struggles that anybody in a stressful profession would go through. Thorough understanding of trauma, stress injury, and uses eye movement therapy for treatment. Someone really needs to be a trauma treatment specialist and really also an expert in the brain science of stress and trauma. And then, of course, also well trained and experienced in treating trauma. So we use ART, accelerated resolution therapy, and there are other eye movement therapies that have been around a long time, are evidence-based, and eye movement therapy does work well and pretty quickly, especially ART. And so it's important that somebody has an actual plan of really what to do and how to help. Just talking isn't going to do it for everybody, and for about half the people, it'll actually make things worse. We certainly hear about that when someone has given that a try elsewhere. Someone who's comfortable with guns in their office. Not all therapists will be. This is really important and critical, of course. Is fluent in suicidality and safety planning. This is also critical. You have to have this fluency to be able to identify and not underreact or overreact, the ability to ask the right questions, the ability to help someone who's feeling suicidal feel comfortable speaking with you, the ability to go there and say and do and ask the things that some wouldn't have the knowledge or understanding or expertise to do, and then to safety plan, because unlike when I worked on a psychiatric crisis team, we are not on the standing on the side of a street corner trying to assess someone who's acutely suicidal. We're in the safety of a therapy office, luckily, and if somebody's opening up to us about this, they're also extremely likely to be working with us on safety. So there are incredible opportunities here to help someone stay alive when maybe they wouldn't have otherwise, if you really know what you're doing. So I can't emphasize this enough. All of these in combination are important, but this one, somebody really has to go above and beyond what they were taught in school, or maybe in some minimal CEU they took at some point. They've really got to know it inside and out. This person has reliable and consistent self-care strategies to mitigate the high secondary trauma exposure. This is really important because there is really extremely high secondary trauma exposure when you are a police therapist. And this is well above and beyond what a typical therapist will experience. So someone has to be able and willing and capable of managing that. You have to be comfortable working with couples, at least short term, and you have to understand the strain of police work on families. Once you're trusted, a lot of times the therapist is going to want to stick with you. So even if you aren't the one doing the couples work, you've got to be able to know that other side of the dynamic and understand. And same thing, if you're working with the spouse of a law enforcement officer, you've got to know both sides of that same coin, because they work in concert to create those dynamics that are troubling the couples. You need to understand privacy concerns and guarantee confidentiality, and know how to document in a client-centered way. So this is what I meant up above as well. Client-centered approach, person-centered approach. What is the best approach regarding documentation and confidentiality that also follows ethical guidelines that we have to follow? This is often, for us, very minimal documentation, sometimes no documentation, just for those check-ins, which are consultations and not treatment. You need to know when to refer. You need to know what your limits are, and when you're working with someone who isn't going to get everything they need from you, and you've got to know how to make those referrals when and to whom. And then this police therapist is confident in their skills and credibility and can put officers at ease. Cops, of course, have a finely tuned BS detector, and if you haven't worked with cops before, you'll find this out, and you need to be ready for that, and able to help an officer who is very understandably fearful about the therapy process be at ease. Answer any questions potentially even before they are asked, and make sure that you know what you're talking about. Another wellness program component is a mentor program for new hires. I've seen some agencies doing this. It's a neat opportunity to help new hires adjust to the job, to support them during that stressful training period, to talk to them about self-care, what is necessary for the job to be sustainable, normalize what they go through in their first couple of years, and then really pull them into the fold of the culture of wellness at your agency. It's best if these mentor programs aren't necessarily made up of peer support team members. Sometimes that may make sense, Sometimes at a smaller agency, it might be necessary, but it may also be a separate piece to try to avoid burnout. Chaplaincy services, I'll just touch on. You can learn more at these 4 options down below if you don't already have one with your agency. But chaplaincy services aren't at all supposed to be about pushing any kind of religion on officers. It's more another option for emotional and spiritual support. They can even be an arm of the peer support team. I've had a number of chaplains in on the peer support training that I provide, and they've said that they have learned a lot and are going to use their takeaways in their work. They can also assist with death notifications and other pieces to help support officers or deputies in just the course of their work. Employer paid therapy sessions. These are important because the therapist normally, when billing insurance, has to include a diagnosis. We have to prove that the service we're providing is medically necessary, and the way we do that is with a diagnosis. In order to properly diagnose, a pretty comprehensive assessment needs to be done, which can include a lot more information and documentation than a law enforcement officer might be comfortable with. So we don't want to recreate those barriers to care by mirroring that system that's out there. And instead, if we're billing an employer with an anonymous code of confidentiality, we are still, of course, assessing what's going on. It's 99% of the time, of course, stress symptoms that we're addressing, but we're able to do that in a more informal way. We still have to meet our ethical duties to document. We need to know the issue that we're working with, the progress we're making, and what's the plan to address what's going on. But we can keep our records within our practice. We don't have to bill out to a third party when we are able to bill employers instead of insurance. This is another way to ensure that your people have access to occupationally competent providers instead of just whoever happens to be within your network, whether that's EAP or insurance. And then essentially, if you've got a therapist who is employer paid and works in this sort of realm, they, like us, should be super passionate about this and ultimately want to be an upstream care provider where we can address what has accumulated to the point where we step in, but also really try to get ahead of the problem, give people the information they need, assist with agency development of wellness programming, give people the resources they need, the access to techniques and care and resources and information that they need to get ahead of this and help the career be sustainable. So a police therapist should really work in concert with you and your wellness programming, be a consultant, and also part of what drives your agency to help create the sustainability in the career. Annual all-staff check-ins are an option. So many agencies, we work with over 45 agencies, and about 30 or more of them are doing all-staff check-ins. So what these are is a consultation with a mental health professional. It's no cost to the officer, and it includes education on common signs of acute and chronic stress. We talk about resilience factors, and we also get into kind of that personal investment an individual needs to have into their own health, wellness, and resilience. We can talk about where anybody is struggling. And for those who don't want to share much, we don't have an expectation of what gets shared. We're more than happy to talk through whatever someone may come in with. And a good portion of the time, someone does come in with something in particular they want to consult about. And then they also have access to further sessions if they choose to opt into those. So if nothing else, we have an easygoing conversation with officers. We get to know them, they get to know us. And then ultimately, we want to be a familiar resource who they can reach out to should you ever need it. That's the big picture goal. It's not therapy, it's not treatment, and it's not an evaluation. We don't write anything down, we're not recording anything. and all we do is verify attendance to the employer. And we don't have to diagnose, and of course, we don't ever have to diagnose for these employer paid sessions that may follow. There are protocols for new hires that can be put into place. Some agencies, even if they don't know exactly what they want to do big picture, are starting with new hires, because what a neat way to just hit the ground running regarding wellness and access to information that you really need at the start of your career to have what you need long term. Lots of officers say, I wish I had this when I started, 10, 15, 25 years ago. And this is where a new hire can get an intro to the peer support team and the wellness program. They can do a mental health check-in with their agency's therapist. That they may be connected to that mentor program if you have one. And then we do, for many of our agencies, a healthy family presentation along with an officer from your agency. And we invite in spouses and significant others, and we speak to, here's what to expect, here's what to do. It's also important to start that community building for spouses and significant others, and that can be done in that new hire process. So besides that healthy family meeting, you could consider providing them with a family safety plan, which is an attachment that you've been given to walk through really one of the things that families have worried about most in the last couple of years. What if my officer was involved in something major and then my family became a target of those out there who want to make life difficult for people who are doing the job they were asked to do in law enforcement. So that's an option that you have, but also generally community building. I want to really emphasize the importance of this. With as many officers who have been questioning their work and potentially leaving these last couple of years, I would say the two main factors, that it's actually one factor, but it's broken down into two main areas. The main factor that seems to drive those decisions to question or leave is support. So, not feeling supported by a community or our society at large, whether it's actually the support is there or not, the way that it feels is really important. But the pieces that can be controlled are twofold. So how supported an officer feels by their agency, and then how much their family and significant other supports their role in law enforcement. So if it isn't that they are not feeling supported at work and so they want to leave, it tends to be that their significant other is not supporting the work anymore and wants them to leave, and sometimes says it's either me or the job. So to counterbalance this, I definitely recommend family community building activities. So maybe an annual dinner with presentations. You could provide self-defense classes to significant others to help build relationships between them and help them feel more like they are under the wing of the agency. Law enforcement family presentations by your police therapist, maybe that's your healthy family meeting, or ongoing invitations to those as they happen. You could also have email addresses and phone numbers of spouses and significant others and directly invite them to different pieces. But just like in the military, how there's a military family, I think that concept needs to be built up in law enforcement as well, from what I can tell. This is the family emergency plan. I won't spend too much time on it because it's included as an attachment for you all. But families, especially after an OIS or a major critical incident, can feel helpless and fearful. They themselves are having a stress response. Sometimes they'll wonder of their spouse, why didn't you tell me X, Y, or Z? Gaps in communication can show up. Some couples fall into a team approach and some couples fall apart. There can be a lot of confusion involved, and kids play a role in that. They sometimes need information and direction. And so having a plan and having a plan for your friends and others, kind of knowing what needs to come into play should something happen that cues the need for this is important. One of the antidotes to anxiety is action. And so these are some things that a family can do and an agency can provide for a family should something awful happen. Working out on duty. So having policy that allows for working out on duty and even encourages it, maybe incentivizes it, such as challenges between teams or other incentives that you might come up with, is super important. So having the recognition that long shifts make it really difficult to work out before or after work, but also the awareness that daily exercise is really necessary for overall health and stress management. For any human, and especially in a high stress job like a first responder has. So having the facilities, the policies, and the actual practices that make it possible to work out on duty and encourage it are really important. You can also have training that provides targeted stretching or corrective exercises for those really common aches and injuries that often have to do with the shoulders, the back, and the hips. Generally, having quality annual all-staff training is important. These are some topics that can be spoken to during those trainings. So anything from financial wellness, which is a really important piece, because it can cause a lot of toxic stress to build up a bunch of debt and live a lifestyle that really requires you to keep working more than is good for you. Everything from that to nutrition, to physical fitness and functional movement, stress management, healthy law enforcement dynamics for families, retirement planning and transitioning, alcohol and substance abuse. There's just kind of lots and lots of different topics that really quality training could be good for. Heart health, sleep, all kinds of things. A therapy dog program is an option for an agency's wellness program. I know of 3 now who have therapy dogs or have approval and are about to get one. I love that this is really expanding. I have had Charlie for 2 years now as a therapy dog and bring him wherever I go. And I have an additional therapy dog now as well. Callie is her name. It's just been such a positive for everyone we work with and for us. And I really hoped that our use of therapy dogs would encourage agencies to adopt the same approach. So we all know dogs live in the present moment. They're endlessly loyal. We hardly deserve them, right? They're fantastic. Even if we don't like people, we tend to like dogs. And so between difficult calls or even on calls for a team, like a mental health unit, sometimes a dog lives dual purpose and can go along with a mental health response team in that way. But to have someone who's really invested in it as the primary handler and then a couple of backups is important. Selecting the right dog specifically is important. And a lot of these things will be spoken to in a webinar that we have that I mentioned that's coming up, which by the time you watch this, maybe will have happened and then is available on our virtual classroom platform. Critical incident support. So having all different angles of wellness woven into your critical incident response is important. So there can be peer support involvement, clinician support, access to therapy sessions for those involved if they aren't already available to everybody, and then policies specific to the incidents that takes mental health into consideration. And just for a brief example, one would be to have different officers kind of share the load of the trauma. So less time on scene for each person, less senses involved, such as if sight and sound and smell are involved, at least not touch. Anything like that can help. The length of time on scene and the more senses that are involved, the more of a stress response there's likely to be. So it's really a balance to find of helping people take turns to kind of share that load of the stress and minimize the impact on any one person. Family safety plan is another piece of critical incident support, which should be in place ahead of time. App-based services, these are another approach to a comprehensive wellness program. So for about a year, I'd been sorting through how to approach app-based services, knowing that it's really important. It's really the direction that so much is going. Having in the palm of your hand on the phone that you tend to look at and refer to all day, a really valuable tool and resource such as the wellness app specifically for first responders is such a neat concept. So I was approached by Lexipol, who acquired Cortico, and asked to partner up with them. So we've done that, and excuse me, I am part of kind of their wellness team there at Cortico. So you'll hear and see more about that as time goes on, but it's an example of one of these app-based services. They specifically have really high quality content. For example, Gil Martin, Gordon Graham are on their board and provide content. And so, of course, I just really appreciate high quality services, and so I'm really thrilled to be partnered with them. So if you have an interest in that, you can certainly reach out and see how that may work at your agency. For those who wouldn't necessarily call us or a therapist, they are very likely still to open an app, take a look at a topic, watch a video, read something on how they're feeling, do a quick self-assessment. Information is power, and that knowledge, that self-knowledge, allows someone to take the next step of changing something up, getting what they need, asking for help, whatever that may be. A wellness room on site is a good idea. I had a couple agencies ask me about this in the last 6 months or so, as ways that they wanted to build in more on-site abilities for officers to have a little bit of recovery and rest time. So attached to the email is a document, and in that attachment you'll see all these different pieces and what can really make a room super useful to someone who wants to just kind of down regulate for a minute. All the intensity that can build up during a shift is really well relieved through exercise, but also through rest. Being able to pull back and down regulate a bit, not always be in hyperdrive, is really healthy for your system. A sabbatical. So there's an agency in Minnesota who has implemented this. This is already being done in other companies and other areas in the private sector, in the public sector. It's common when a professor at a college has tenure, they can often take a half a year or a year sabbatical. It's really meant to help them have time to reflect and learn more, write a book, write articles, really whatever that may be. But for law enforcement and first responders, once somebody has about 5 years of service, I think it makes a lot of sense to help encourage a balanced life. 30 days paid leave for every 4 years of service. Hopefully you know exactly what you would do at that time, whether it would be travel or start or finish a project or invest in quality time with your family and loved ones. Whatever that might be, it seems really healthy option. Familiarity building services with a therapist. I spoke to this briefly, and I'll just mention how important it is to really give your therapist the ability to be visible, be familiar, for people to become acquainted with them. It's easier to reach out if you have a sense of who is on the other line when you call. Intros at roll calls, presenting at in-services, having materials around the PD to distribute, and kind of bringing them in on your turf, and allowing them to kind of see how things run at your agency, what the culture is like, and what the calls are like. Heart health screenings. So I want to talk here about preventable cardiac disease. And I highlighted the word preventable because there really is so much that can be done. The police officer's life expectancy is about 22 years less than the average person they serve. This seems extremely unacceptable. And one of the reasons is heart attack. Suicide, heart attack, heart disease, cancer, dementia. There are so many ailments for first responders. PTSD. And one of the ways to address this is to assist connecting officers to heart screenings. So just one example is Sigma Tactical Wellness. I knew of them. I knew of the good work they're doing. I know they've worked now with one agency in Minnesota, but they've worked all over the United States with about 8 or more thousand officers providing screenings. They really do target law enforcement and work also with fire and EMS and others. But I like how they are using cutting edge technology, and they're helping identify and then address or even eliminate heart disease in officers. So I listed here the components that they use in their screenings, the type of analysis that they do, the consultation they provide, and the data that gets reported. Aggregate data, not anything identifying. So I know some agencies, I spoke with one of their founders, and I know that some agencies pay for officers to do this. Some pay half, some pay none, but just connect you to the service. Whatever might be possible seems like a neat way to address, whether it's early on or later in the game, any potential heart disease. Substance abuse and dependency support and policy. So a peer support team can help identify substance abuse. Anything that is identifiable by a peer can more easily be addressed. And from the admin side, allowing for admin leave for someone to attend treatment. I certainly have know of agencies who have said, if you self-identify and ask for help, we will support you. We will provide you with even sometimes paid leave to go and get what you need and return when you're healthy. It's, of course, unfortunately, all too common for officers to lean too heavily on alcohol. It sedates the system and provides a feeling of downregulation that we hope to help them get in other healthy ways through a lot of the training and consultations that we do. But in the meantime, it certainly is a problem. And so knowing how to address it, it should be something that your police therapist is very well aware of and can also address and connect people to the right resources for. It's important that a therapist has 24/7 availability. And one of the ways our agencies provide this to their officers is through a retainer or retainer services. So since your career is a 24/7 job, a clinician, unlike most, a law enforcement clinician needs to be willing to be available 24/7. So luckily with my associates between us, we cover all of the hours in a day with a 1-hour callback time. So of course, we're not an emergency service, but we can respond urgently to calls at any time of day when things come up. So we can also provide with our retainer services, and any of this can be done and you could do with whoever you choose for your law enforcement therapist. You can have them be a resource to you for wellness program consulting, for peer support team consulting. I help, and anybody you go with who knows how to do it or is welcome to take this 30-hour course and learn how. They can help with developing your team, maintaining it. They can provide the clinical support. They can help run and organize the quarterly meetings and provide ongoing training topics. So this helps with that handoff that admin needs to give to a peer support team to know that they're in good hands with that clinical consultant. Employee access to urgent care by phone and in person is included in these retainer services, or just kind of as needed, a la carte for agencies who don't have that full programming with the retainer. Healthy family meetings are included with the retainer or can be a la carte, and then ride-alongs, roll calls, those on-site familiarity building can either be built in with the retainer or a la carte as needed services. So just to review back on these 6 resilience factors, they really are something that works in concert and in conjunction. So just built into the job, the nature of the work are those withdrawals and the very things that can leave you chronically stressed and drained and burned out, or even ill, physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever that may be. And so to offset that, to have your approach to the job at your agency really built around a sustainable approach that takes into account what we know so well now with all of the research going on regarding brain health and physical health, heart health, all of these different things. So I hope that this has helped you really get a good sense of all the pieces at play that need to be addressed. Maybe you have a sense of where you'd like to start first, but providing the opportunities for access to all of these different pieces that make up a really thorough approach to wellness is important. And then the individual initiative, of course, is what really allows it to be possible. So the combination of those two things, that's so important. This is another way of looking at it. If we on the right side have this, if on the right side here we have this, the pieces that are the withdrawals that are so common in the first responder world, the chronic work stress, which happens because the work itself is stressful and takes a certain operating mode that's oriented towards safety and survival. And then out of efficiency, our brain tends to predict that more is coming, which you know it is on the next shift. And so it tends to just stay in that chronically stressed or hypervigilant mode. When you carry that home and misapply that work mode at home, you feel the consequences. When it gets misapplied within the four walls of your agency, you feel that. Any operating mode misapplied to the wrong area is, of course, going to have consequences either sooner or later. So really helping to work against that. It can show up as sleep deprivation. That's a stress symptom that's so common. Chronic pain, we hold tension in our body as we hold stress in our body as tension. Sometimes there are injuries and those can compound it. Unprocessed trauma, toxic stressors, alcohol abuse, personal stressors. Everybody, of course, is still human, has their own losses and grieving and divorce and challenges with kids and parenting and all the things that go on. And to offset those things, here's what we have been speaking to on the other side. So all of your policies and practices, training, and all the different options you have for these different components. If you don't know where to start with wellness programming and the components that make up a comprehensive program, you could start with a survey to all staff, an anonymous survey, laying out all the different approaches to wellness that are an option to your agency, and then ask people what they're interested in. Maybe a wellness steering committee does this, maybe a specific person on staff who's very especially passionate about wellness and peer support could take the lead on this, but make sure no one person ends up carrying the brunt of these things, or they can potentially burn out and then your program can flounder or disappear. If you aren't sure where to start, you have made a good decision starting with peer support. If this is the first occupationally competent and specific wellness approach that you're taking is peer support, that's fantastic. Building in clinical consultation with it is a great starting point. You will then be able to really turn your team over to the care of that clinical consultant. You can feel confident that the peer support members have solid training through this 30-hour training, and then the support with development and maintenance of the team as well. You're utilizing your best existing resources regarding wellness, building on their capacity, and then you can go from there and see maybe what's next in your programming. Next up, you're going to hear from Captain Joe Gerhard with Blaine Police. He's going to talk to us about these different pieces of wellness programming at their PD. And that is the next video, and it's also the last video in this first section of videos. So you will have, after you watch the segment where I have a conversation with Captain Gerhard, you will have completed your first 4 hours of the virtual online training. Thank you for your time and attention today. I appreciate it. I'm excited about getting to provide you with this information, these ideas. I'm sure there are others. I'd love to hear about them. And please do let me know if you have questions. You can contact us at information@marieridgeway.com. And if there's something we can do to help out, or we can connect you to a therapist I've trained, or maybe we can help you directly, please let me know. Just would really love if every officer and agency is connected to the wellness programming that's needed. We appreciate what you do, we support you, and I really look forward to seeing you either at the future trainings you have during this peer support training, or next time our paths cross. Thank you so much.